The desert sun rose slow and merciless over the coastal training range, turning the sand into sheets of blinding gold. Heat shimmered above the firing lanes, bending the horizon into a wavering illusion. Steel silhouettes stood at distances that swallowed pride, 300 meters, 600 meters, 900 meters, waiting for the crack of rifles and the judgment that followed. Lieutenant Arya Vale adjusted the sling on her precision rifle and ignored the laughter behind her. "Nice toy," someone muttered. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She had memorized the tone already, half amusement, half dismissal. The kind of voice that believed skill belonged to a certain shape, a certain build, a certain history. The kind that saw her and assumed she was lost. Petty Officer Grant Maddox, a decorated SEAL sniper with deployments that filled rooms with quiet respect, leaned against a truck and looked at her rifle with exaggerated curiosity. "That thing custom built for Barbie," he added. A few chuckles rippled through the group. Arya breathed in through her nose and let the air settle deep in her lungs. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. Words didn't weigh as much as expectation. The qualification today was simple on paper and brutal in execution, timed long-range engagement under environmental stress. Wind variable, targets unpredictable, missed too many, and you were out. The instructors moved along the line, clipboards in hand. Shooters loaded magazines with ritualistic precision. Scope caps flipped open. Bipods sank into sand. Arya knelt, checked her bolt, and dialed her optic. Her rifle wasn't flashy. It was a tool, balanced, tuned, and scarred from hours of practice. She didn't caress it. She respected it. "Shooter ready," the range master called. She nodded. Maddox smirked as he settled beside her in the next lane. "Don't blink," he said lightly. "Targets out there tend to bite." The first target popped at 400 meters. Crack. Arya's rifle spoke once. The steel rang like a bell. The second target appeared, moving lateral at 600 meters. She tracked, calculated lead, controlled her breathing. Crack. Another clean hit. The laughter behind her quieted. Not gone, just softened. Maddox fired next to her, smooth and confident. He hit his mark too, but his glance toward her was sharper now. The wind shifted. Flags snapped sideways. Mirage thickened. Target at 900 meters. A difficult shot, even for veterans. Arya adjusted elevation. She didn't rush. She let the wind talk through the grass and dust. She trusted her math. Crack. A heartbeat of silence. Then, clang. Dead center. Someone cursed under their breath. Maddox fired a second later. His round struck the edge, enough to count, but not perfect. Arya cycled her bolt calmly. No celebration, no glance sideways. The qualification continued, each round a quiet argument against doubt. By the time the final target dropped, her score sheet bore only tight clusters and clean confirmations. When the ceasefire was called, instructors walked the line reviewing data. Maddox stood and stretched. "Beginner's luck," he said, but it sounded thinner now. Arya rose and slung her rifle. "Wind doesn't care about luck," she replied softly. That should have been the end of it. A completed qualification, a score logged, a silent shift in perception. But deserts don't always stay quiet. The first explosion came from beyond the eastern ridge. It wasn't part of training. The shockwave hit half a second later, rattling trucks and knocking dust from tarps. Every head snapped toward the sound. Then came gunfire. Not controlled, timed shots. Chaotic, close. The range master shouted orders. "Weapons hot. This is not a drill." Smoke curled up from the perimeter fence. A support convoy near the outer access road had taken the blast. Through binoculars, figures moved, some scrambling, some falling. Arya's pulse didn't spike. It narrowed. This was no longer qualification. This was survival. Maddox's smirk vanished. He shouldered his rifle with professional speed. Contact. East Ridge. Someone yelled. Rounds snapped overhead, sharp and ugly. The training range had turned into a battlefield. Arya dropped behind a concrete barrier and assessed distances automatically. 500 meters to the ridge. Elevation slight. Hostiles using rock outcroppings as cover. She spotted muzzle flash. Dialed. Exhaled. Crack. The flash vanished. Another shooter emerged farther right, trying to flank toward the disabled convoy. She adjusted. Crack. Down. Who's got those hits? Someone shouted. Maddox glanced at her, eyes no longer amused. You did that, he asked. She didn't answer. She was already scanning. More gunfire erupted near the convoy. 2 service members were pinned behind an overturned vehicle. Arya shifted position for a better angle. Wind had changed again, gusting, erratic from the blast. She recalculated. Crack. One hostile fell mid-stride. Crack. Another dropped behind a rock. The immediate pressure on the convoy eased. Maddox moved closer, kneeling beside her. "We need to suppress that left flank," he said, voice clipped and focused now. "Two shooters," Arya replied. "One high, one low. High one's bait." He studied her for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Take high." They fired nearly simultaneously. 2 impacts. 2 threats neutralized. Sirens wailed from the base beyond the range. Reinforcements were mobilizing, but the attackers weren't done. A truck roared over the ridge, mounted weapon visible in its bed. "That's bad," someone muttered. The mounted gun spat rounds toward the convoy, chewing through metal. Arya felt the weight of distance and angle in her bones. The driver was shielded. The gunner was exposed, barely. Wind gusted crosswise. She steadied. Maddox watched her this time without speaking. Crack. The gunner jerked and fell from the truck. The vehicle swerved wildly. Maddox seized the moment. Crack. The front tire blew. The truck skidded sideways into sand, immobilized. Security forces swarmed in minutes later, overwhelming the remaining attackers. Silence returned slowly, broken by the hiss of smoke and distant shouts. Arya lowered her rifle only when she was certain. Maddox exhaled a breath he'd been holding. "Not a toy," he said quietly. She glanced at him, sweat streaking dust across her cheek. "No," she agreed. Medics rushed the convoy casualties. Miraculously, most had survived thanks to the rapid suppression. An instructor approached Arya, eyes sharp with new appraisal. "Those long-range neutralizations saved lives." She nodded once. "That's the job." The desert heat felt different now, less oppressive, more alive. The range target stood untouched in the distance, irrelevant. Maddox removed his helmet and studied her like he was recalibrating an equation. "You ever deploy?" he asked. "Twice," she replied. "You?" He almost smiled. "More than I can count." A pause. "Nice shooting," he said finally. It wasn't mockery this time. It was respect. Helicopters thundered overhead, circling. Smoke thinned. The emergency had lasted less than 20 minutes. But those 20 minutes would echo far longer. Word would spread. About the qualification that turned real. About the sniper who didn't flinch. About the moment laughter died and understanding replaced it. As investigators secured the scene and wounded were evacuated, Arya sat on the tailgate of a truck and cleaned sand from her bolt assembly. Her hands were steady. Maddox approached with 2 canteens and handed her one. "You kept your head," he said. "A lot of people don't." She took a sip. "Pressure doesn't change math." He chuckled faintly. "You talk like that everywhere. Only when people call my rifle a toy." He nodded, accepting the rebuke. Across the range, instructors were already reconstructing timelines. The attackers had chosen poorly. They hadn't anticipated trained marksmen already dialed in at distance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As dusk approached, the range glowed orange. The day's scheduled drills were cancelled. Instead, debriefs began. Inside a temporary command tent, footage from range cameras replayed on screens. Each of Arya's shots marked with timestamps. Wind data overlaid. Impact confirmations flashing green. Maddox watched quietly. "That's elite work," one instructor murmured. Arya stood at the back, arms folded. She hadn't come to prove anyone wrong. She had come to do her job. But sometimes doing your job was the loudest answer. Outside, the steel targets still waited in the distance, silent witnesses to a day that blurred training and war. And somewhere in the desert wind, the echo of, "nice toy," dissolved into something unrecognizable. Respect. Night settled over the base like a heavy curtain, but sleep didn't come easily to anyone who had been on that range. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter while investigators combed through the wreckage of the disabled truck. The air still carried the faint metallic scent of spent ammunition and scorched rubber. Inside the operations building, debrief screens glowed blue against tired faces. Maps were pinned with fresh markers showing the attack's approach vectors. Intelligence officers spoke in low, controlled tones. This hadn't been random. The convoy hit had been calculated, timed during qualification when attention would be divided. Arya sat near the back again, hands folded, posture straight. She answered questions when asked. Distances, angles, estimated shooter positions. Her voice remained even, detached from ego. Maddox leaned against the wall across from her, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt once. When the debrief ended, the commanding officer stepped forward. "Quick action prevented mass casualties today. Several of you performed beyond expectation." His eyes paused briefly on Arya. "Especially our long-range response." There was a ripple of acknowledgement in the room, no applause, just understanding. Outside, Maddox caught up with her near the barracks. "You read wind like it owes you money," he said. She gave a small smile. "Wind's predictable if you respect it." He hesitated, then extended a hand. "Grant Maddox." She shook it. "Arya Vale." "I know," he said. "I should have started with that." Over the next 48 hours, reports filtered in. The attackers were part of a regional militant cell that had been probing base vulnerabilities. They hadn't expected a sniper qualification team already zeroed and ready. They hadn't expected someone who could thread rounds through chaos at nearly a kilometer. The story moved fast. Footage circulated internally first, then up the chain. Evaluations were updated, recommendations drafted. 3 days later, Arya was summoned to the command office. The room was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. "You kept a cool head under live fire," the commander said. "We're assembling a rapid deployment Overwatch unit. We'd like you on it." She didn't react outwardly, but inside something sharpened. "Understood, sir." The unit mobilized within a week. This wasn't a training range anymore. It was a volatile region overseas where mountain ridgelines replaced desert flats and the air carried the tension of constant watchfulness. Maddox was assigned too. On the transport flight, he leaned across the aisle. "Guess we're teammates now." She adjusted her headset. "Try not to call my gear a toy." He grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." The mountains were unforgiving. Thin air, shifting thermals, narrow valleys that turned sound into deception. Their mission? Provide overwatch for a humanitarian evacuation corridor threatened by insurgent forces. Villagers were trapped between factions. The unit's job was to keep the high ground secure long enough for buses and medical trucks to pass safely. On the first day, Arya climbed to a rocky perch overlooking the valley road. Wind currents twisted unpredictably along the cliffs. She set up carefully, anchoring her bipod against stone. Through her scope, the world compressed into crosshairs and calculation. Below, convoys moved cautiously. Then came the glint of optics from a distant ridge, enemy sniper. "Clock 2, high," she murmured over comms. Maddox adjusted beside her. "Distance, 1,100 meters. Thin air meant flatter trajectory, but gusts were treacherous. The hostile fired first. A round struck near the lead vehicle, scattering gravel. Arya tracked the muzzle flash origin. The shooter shifted, thinking distance was protection. She steadied, exhaled. Crack. The distant figure collapsed backward behind the ridge. Impact, Maddox confirmed. The convoy continued. Hours later, insurgents attempted a coordinated push from multiple slopes. Arya and Maddox worked in rhythm now, no mockery, no ego. Just precision. When her magazine ran dry, he covered. When wind readings fluctuated, she adjusted his elevation. Trust formed not through words but through shared survival. By dusk, the corridor held. Civilians passed through unharmed. On the third day, a mortar team began setting up beyond visual range, preparing to arc explosives into the valley. Arya caught the faint outline of tubes being assembled through a gap in rocks. Distance extreme, angle steep. She adjusted for gravity and crosswind. It was the hardest shot of her career. She didn't rush. The world narrowed to math and breath. Crack. The round struck the mortar base plate. The device flipped sideways, misfiring harmlessly into open rock. Maddox let out a low whistle. "You just saved half that valley." She didn't answer. She was already scanning for follow-up threats. The operation lasted 10 days. When they rotated back home, the reception was quiet but charged with recognition. No one called her rifle a toy again. Weeks later, during another stateside qualification, a new group of trainees lined up under the same merciless sun. One of them glanced at Arya's rifle and opened his mouth, ready with a joke. Maddox stepped in first. "Careful," he said mildly. "That toy saved more lives than you can count." The trainee swallowed his comment. Arya took her position at the line. The range master called out readiness. Targets rose in the distance. She dialed her optic, felt the wind against her cheek, and let the past settle behind her like spent brass. Crack. Steel rang. Somewhere beyond the sound, beyond the dust and heat, beyond the memory of ridicule, was something stronger than pride. Legacy. Not the loud kind carved in headlines. The quiet kind built one steady breath at a time.